There Might Be Hope, Chapter 8, Apex Omnivore. Weston A. Price was a dentist who studied the diets of indigenous people and their dental health in the early 20th century. The indigenous peoples he studied remained largely isolated from outside influences, and most had nearly perfect dental health, even into their old age. Their teeth were naturally straight and white with little tooth loss. Based on his studies, he contributed their excellent health to their primarily animal-based diets. These diets were rich in fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, and complex proteins. Today, the Weston A. Price Foundation carries on his work, and they espouse that what a person eats or doesn't eat carries down to the third generation. They believe that the food you eat today will influence your epigenetic code and even the epigenetics of your grandchildren. For baby boomers who were raised, sometimes literally, playing in DDT, the belief that their consumption patterns didn't affect them personally was likely true. They had inherited the nutrition of their grandparents. Their grandparents were known as the Lost Generation. They were born between 1890 and 1915, when the only pesticide known was arsenic, and when horsepower generally still referred to horses. Beef and pork might have been locally grown, or shipped in on refrigerated rail car. Vegetables and fruits were predominantly locally grown, even if staples and spices were imported from other states. The Lost Generation's children, the greatest generation, inherited this goodness and passed it along to their children, the baby boomers. It was during this era, the era that baby boomers were born, that the Green Revolution, the widespread use of synthetic and organic nitrogen fertilizers, and dispersal of halogen-based pesticides began. If Weston A. Price's theory holds true, then even the children of baby boomers might have retained genetic and nutritional buffers that they inherited from their greatest generation grandparents that would shield them against disease and dysfunction. If Weston A. Price's theory holds true, the grandchildren of baby boomers would be the first to evidence signs of mass toxicity. This generation is Generation Z. As the body attempts to detoxify itself from increasing levels of toxicity, it will fight for survival. As with other mammals, the human body first eliminates as many poisons as possible out of the body through the digestive system, liver, and kidneys. The ability of the digestive system, along with the liver, kidneys, gallbladder, and pancreas, to detoxify foreign chemicals from the body depends upon them having more than adequate nutrition. A loaded detoxification system needs more resources, such as vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, to complete its job, not less. Unfortunately, due to the condition of our soil microbiomes, most people's detoxification systems don't have enough nutrients to adequately process these inherited chemical burdens. As with other mammals, when the body's detoxification systems are loaded to their maximum capacities, the body will naturally prioritize its own survival and protect the central nervous and cardiovascular systems by shunting poisons to the less essential areas of the body, such as the extremities and bone marrow. Like empty Amazon boxes piling up in a closet, without an outlet, these toxins will eventually accumulate and spill over into essential bodily systems. Females have an additional mechanism for detoxification. The overburdened female body can disperse excess toxin concentrations through childbirth and nursing. Gluten-free, leaky gut, brain fog, chronic fatigue, AIP protocol. These terms were virtually unheard of prior to the mid-2000s. By the mid-2010s, they were everywhere. Females in the Generation Y and Millennial range seem to be the predominant sufferers of these very unscientifically labeled health crises. In fact, many physicians didn't believe these conditions were real. Perhaps it is because females are generally smaller bodied than men and were more sensitive to smaller concentrations of chemicals. Perhaps the female hormonal system, being more complex, is more quickly disrupted than the male system. Many women were told that their symptoms were all in their heads. Initially viewed largely as pseudoscience, functional medicine physicians began treating for general inflammation and focusing primarily on the digestive system. The reality was it was not pseudoscience. The inflammation response in consumers was perhaps mirroring the inflammation response that scientists had measured in plants in response to pesticides. Additionally, physicians were now treating transgenes in digestive systems which had never existed before. Standard diagnostic tools couldn't find what they weren't built to find. Diagnosticians couldn't identify what they weren't trained to identify. Of course, pesticide usage and agricultural transgenes could be ruled out as contributing factors. Science had proven they were perfectly safe, or had it. The reality was that the research performed on the genetically modified or trans crops and chemicals people were consuming at unprecedented amounts had mostly been scuttled. But internal records were made public due to a lawsuit, and the deception came to light. Agency's FDA newly released 44,000 pages revealed that government scientists' references to the unintended negative effects were progressively deleted from drafts of the policy statement over the protests of agency scientists. They were further revealed that the FDA was under orders from the White House to promote GM crops, and that Michael Taylor, Monsanto's former attorney and later its vice president, was brought into the FDA to oversee policy development. With Taylor in charge, the scientists' warnings were ignored and denied. Genetic roulette, Jeffrey Smith. Consumption of genetically modified or trans foods remodels the human digestive microbiome at the genetic level, producing new and harmful digestive microbes. Some of the microbes may have the ability to reproduce pesticides within the human digestive tract, effectively killing off the native microbes. After doing so, they may establish transgenic control and dominance over the bacterial flora of the digestive system. Glyphosate also weakens the cellular junctions of the digestive tract and allows partially digested food to slip through into the bloodstream. Once inside the bloodstream, these foods are viewed as foreign bodies and rejected thenceforth from the entire body, and a new allergen is born. These weakened intestinal cells further create a heavy metal highway into the bloodstream, which transports them to the soft tissues, such as the brain, thyroid, and reproductive glands. Glyphosate also weakens mitochondrial membranes, disrupts ATP synthesis, and causes oxidative stress to the mitochondria, the energy production plant of the body. In other words, glyphosate drains energy from the body at the cellular level. Not only were women's diets being saturated with transgenes, herbicides, and insecticides, their foods were grown in increasingly nutrient-scarce soil microbiomes. Once mycorrhizae were destroyed, plants were left without anyone to hunt down and bring home the nematodes that built omega-3s and omega-6s within the soil. Halogen pesticides replaced the mycorrhizae in order to control the nematode population. And the result was nematode obliteration and fewer essential fatty acids being made within the soil for plants to consume. The female reproductive system practically runs on fatty acids. Suddenly, estrogen dominance, low progesterone, and PCOS, formerly an almost unheard of diagnosis, became commonplace. Depression in general rose rapidly in Americans between 2005 and 2015, but it rose most rapidly in young women. A multitude of cultural and societal changes in our world during that time frame might have contributed to these conditions, but depletion of dietary omega 3s and 6s are undoubtedly key contributors. Gluten-free, leaky gut, brain fog, chronic fatigue, disrupted nervous systems, porous digestive membranes, decreased energy metabolism, and dysfunctional reproductive systems. Suddenly, the crazy ladies didn't sound so crazy anymore. Gen Z and Gen Alpha are the first generations to be introduced in utero to the effects of this perfect storm of a womb surrounded by an overloaded detoxification system and fed by an already nutrient deficient body while absorbing transgenes, pesticides, and heavy metals. Few intergenerational studies have been conducted on genetically modified or trans foods, and yet all of these factors influence epigenetic changes that take place in the uterus. Some of these changes alter the DNA for generations to come. Some may permanently shift a genetic line towards dysfunction, creating an incalculable number of domino effects across generations, and all of them unhealthy. Human beings are most vulnerable to harm from pesticide exposure in utero, shortly after birth, and at puberty. In 2006, an EPA report from the Office of the Inspector General reported that certain pesticides easily enter the brain of young children and fetuses and can destroy cells. The report concluded that the EPA lacks standard evaluation protocols for measuring the toxicity of pesticides on developing nervous systems, and also charged that risk assessments cannot state with confidence the degree to which any exposure of a fetus, infant, or child to a pesticide will or will not adversely affect their neurological development. Autism, ADHD, depression, severe anxiety, gender dysphoria, social isolation, and hostility are a few of the early hallmarks of Gen Z and Gen Alpha. Notably, these are all either neurological dysfunctions or hormonal imbalances, many of which can trace their origins to impaired digestive and detoxification systems, and still further back to dying and poisoned farm soil microbiomes. Incredibly, only a few years past, researchers discovered an entirely new bodily system, known as the endocannabinoid system. This system helps to calm the nervous system. The endocannabinoid system in the brain primarily influences neuronal synaptic communication and affects biological functions, including eating, anxiety, learning and memory, reproduction, metabolism, growth and development, via an array of actions through the nervous system. The endocannabinoid system modulates neurogenesis, is neuroprotective, aids in synaptic plasticity, and improves memory processing. It decreases inflammation and stress. It plays a key role in how the brain handles pathological pain and aging. The endocannabinoid system relies upon fatty acids, such as arachidonic acid and anandamide. Arachidonic acid, together with another soil fatty acid, DHA, actually make up about 20% of your brain's dry weight. Unsurprisingly, children with autism consistently have low arachidonic and anandamide blood plasma levels. When children with autism have been supplemented with high levels of arachidonic acid, their social interaction abilities have improved substantially. Arachidonic acid is found in meat, poultry, and seafood, but apparently these sources are insufficient because companies are now genetically engineering a natural soil fungus called Mortariella to produce arachidonic acid in a lab. Similar to mycorrhizae, Mortariella is a root-loving fungus, an essential member of the soil microbiome that naturally produces high levels of arachidonic acid in the soil. Pythium ultimatum is a much-hated plant pathogenic root-eating fungus. It was once feared for eating crop plant roots and destroying fields of corn and potatoes. But no worries. Today we have a whole host of pesticides to kill it, such as Pageant, Segway, and Adorn, to name a few. Like Mortierella, though, scientists as of late are trying to grow it intentionally in a lab. Why? So they can sell the naturally high quantities of arachidonic acid it produces. In reality, there are a whole host of interconnected pathways between our besieged soil microbiome and our dinner plates that have been broken down and have led to skyrocketing autism rates. Glyphosate is designed to stop the shikimate pathway that produces tryptophan and phenylalanine. Would it be surprising then to learn that a 2013 study of 138 children with autism, when compared with 138 children without autism, had relatively decreased levels of the essential amino acids tryptophan and phenylalanine? The same fatty acids that are low in children with autism are also low in children with ADHD. As with autism, there are multiple soil microbiome related pathways that can contribute to ADHD. Acetylcholine inhibitors are members of the nerve gas family. As such, they overstimulate nerves, causing them to fire repeatedly to exhaustion. When administered to rats, acetylcholine inhibiting herbicides, true to their nature, created ADHD like behaviors. Interestingly, researchers found that they could use a receptor in the endocannabinoid system to turn down ADHD behavior. Acetylcholine inhibiting herbicide exposure is currently the primary suspect for ADHD development. From 2007 to 2019, suicide rates for youth ages 10 to 23 rose 60% according to the CDC. Gen Z is reportedly twice as likely to battle feelings of hopelessness and despair as millennials, and 3 times as likely to say that their challenges are so severe that they would be better off dead. To give a generational perspective, the American Psychological Society reported that when asked to rate their psychological health, 74% of both the greatest and the silent generations ranked their mental health as very good or excellent. For baby boomers, 70% likewise ranked their mental health as very good or excellent. That number dropped to 51% for Gen X and 56% for millennials. Only 45% of Gen Zers said their mental health was very good or excellent. The common explanation for these symptoms has been that Gen Z is facing greater cultural, societal, economic, and technological challenges than previous generations, and the challenges they face are unquestionably unique in world history. However, the greatest generation and the silent generation survived considerable challenges of their own. They survived the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and World War II. And yet they rank their mental health is almost twice as good as Gen Z. Something seems amiss. Could it be said that previous generations were able to meet their own challenges with a greater resilience because they emerged from childhood without having been starved of essential fatty acids, complex proteins, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals, or saturated by pesticides and transgenes designed to disable their nervous systems? If our glyphosate-tolerant crops have been engineered to survive without tryptophan, tyrosine, and phenylalanine, and if humans were deficient in these amino acids, what symptoms would we see? She began to cry inconsolably and described her emotions as being out of control. She said that she did not know why she was crying but could not stop. She also described psychic anxiety, difficulty concentrating, loss of energy, loss of confidence, and a sense that nothing was worthwhile. She felt as if all the gains she had made over the past few weeks had evaporated. Simon Young, PhD, referring to a tryptophan deficient participant in the acute tryptophan depletion study. Both serotonin and melatonin production rely on the essential amino acid tryptophan as a precursor. The interactions between serotonin and the body are complex, but low serotonin levels are associated with suicide and depression. Not everyone who's deficient in tryptophan experiences depression, and researchers are not certain why, but it certainly is a causative factor in some people's crippling depression and suicidal feelings. Glyphosate not only inhibits the shikimate pathway in plants, but also in the beneficial bacteria found in human digestive tracts. This gives harmful digestive bacteria a competitive edge, and this destruction of healthy digestive microbes and supplantation with harmful ones is believed to be another key foundational pathway in depression and anxiety. Acetylcholine inhibiting insecticides may also play a significant role in depression and anxiety. Imaging studies have shown elevated acetylcholine levels in actively depressed patients. It's important to remember that acetylcholine inhibiting insecticides stop the natural give and take of acetylcholine between the nerves, leaving them overstimulated. These results are remarkably consistent across species and suggest that blocking or lowering acetylcholinesterase activity, increasing central acetylcholine levels, or stimulating specific cholinergic receptors all lead to depression. Stephanie Dawala, PhD, and David S. Yanowski, MD. Another cause of Gen Z and Gen Alpha's depression and anxiety may be the disruption of the dopamine center of the brain, the substantia nigra. Rats exposed to glyphosate during pregnancy gave birth to young that demonstrated a wide variety of cognitive abnormalities, including abnormalities in the dopamine system. Another similar study found oxidative stress and depressive like behavior in the glyphosate exposed offspring. Yet another study found that young male rats who were exposed to glyphosate in utero had significant decreases in peptide production in the substantia nigra. Their brains were creating about 50% less of the protein than normal. Known as dynorphins, these neuroproteins are involved in pain, mood, and addiction regulation. They also inhibit excitatory neurotransmissions. Gen Z and Gen Alpha are truly feeling and experiencing life differently than previous generations. These studies all focused on subclinical or subchronic levels of glyphosate exposure to the mothers through drinking water, not overt contact. Low levels of dopamine are also linked to ADHD and obesity. Children with low dopamine simply eat more to release more dopamine in their brains and feel better because their brains have been underproducing dopamine since before they were born. It's ironic that pesticides and transgenes were marketed as being necessary to feed a burgeoning world population, and yet the youth they feed are starved of the essential amino acids they need to thrive. These chemicals have created in consumers an insatiable desire to eat more calories than are needed, simply to balance their brain chemicals. Childhood obesity has tripled since 1993. Like ADHD, anxiety, and depression, obesity has many layers. Both in utero and in childhood, critical nutrients must be consumed at critical times, or else the body will suffer lifelong effects, some of which may even pass on to future generations through epigenetics. For example, we know that when critical nutrients are withheld in cattle at specific growth points, the adult animal will naturally have a higher fat to muscle ratio than in animals that did not have their diets restricted at these critical growth points. A considerable number of studies have correlated subclinical pesticide consumption with shifts in glucose metabolism. While no direct link between pesticides and childhood obesity has yet been found, isn't it possible that simply by consuming diets deficient in a variety of key nutrients at key growth points, we are causing the childhood obesity epidemic? Are children overweight today because they're actually starving? Do Gen Z and Gen Alpha children simply have to eat more to meet their basic nutritional needs because their foods are so depleted of nutrients? The biggest criticism leveled at colleagues born between 1995 and 2007 is that they're self centered and unable to negotiate or compromise, which inevitably leads to conflict. Other generations often find it hard to understand them, let alone work with them. Some leading thinkers suggest that this generation needs to be controlled, managed, screened out, even from organizations that depend upon teamwork. Remy Blumenfeld, Forbes contributor. Aggression, hostility, and antisocial tendencies are perhaps some of Gen Z's most notorious generational traits. Interestingly, these same traits also seem to have taken early GM or transgene food researchers by surprise as well. Researchers also noted a high level of anxiety and aggression in both the females and young pups from GM groups. They attacked and bit each other and the worker. Jeffrey Smith, Genetic Roulette. Why these rat pups fed a genetically modified diet became hostile to each other remains unclear, but we do know that glyphosates and herbicidal transgenes destruction of beneficial digestive microbes opens the door for harmful bacteria such as Clostridium and Salmonella to survive. These harmful digestive bacteria produce neurotoxins that can pass through the digestive lining and travel to the brain. Once in the brain, they may stimulate high levels of dopamine, which causes oxidative stress and may lead to addiction, aggression, and poor impulse control. Acetylcholine inhibiting herbicides likely play an even larger role in Gen Z's aggression than transgenes. Researchers now believe that acetylcholine receptors may be the motherboard for all upstream behaviors that drive this aggression, such as mood, inflammation, sociability, impulsivity, anxiety, and fear. There are three primary types of aggression: offensive, defensive, and predatory aggression, and acetylcholine receptors can influence control over all of them. Among the silent generation, less than 0.05% identified as transgender. For baby boomers and Generation X, around 0.2 to 3% of the population identified as transgender. That percentage more than tripled in the millennial generation, with 1% identifying as transgender. Today, 1.9% of Gen Z identifies as transgender. The explosive growth in Gen Z's identification with transgenderism walks hand in hand with feelings of gender dysphoria. Up to half of those diagnosed with gender dysphoria have co-occurring diagnoses of depression and anxiety. Between 32 to 50% of those diagnosed with gender dysphoria have attempted suicide. It is widely assumed that these coexisting feelings of depression and anxiety, along with suicidal attempts, are caused by a lack of societal acceptance. But what if something altogether different is going on? I've done a lot of studies throughout my career, which extends back to 1973. This is the first time what I found scared me. John Woodling, University of Colorado researcher. Boulder Creek runs from just south of Winter Park, Colorado in the Rocky Mountains, through the town of Boulder, and meanders down to the flat farmlands of eastern Colorado. In 2004, scientists made a startling discovery that fish within the creek were displaying characteristics of both male and female genders. This was an entirely new phenomenon for researchers from the University of Colorado at Boulder, but it was also an easy one to explain. An abundance of estrogens and estrogen mimickers in the water were causing male fish to display female sex characteristics. These estrogens and estrogen mimickers were found by research teams in 80% of the streams they tested in 30 states. Herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides have powerful influences upon human hormones as well. You could probably fill a small home library with books about each one. A short list might go something like this: 2,4-D causes synergistic androgenic effects when combined with testosterone. Acephate disrupts hormone expression in the hypothalamus. Acetylchlor interacts with uterine estrogen receptors and alters thyroid hormone-dependent gene expression. Alachlor binds to estrogen and progesterone receptors. It also interferes with the production of enzymes responsible for steroid hormone metabolism. Aldecarb inhibits estradiol and progesterone activity. Aldrin binds to androgen receptors. Atrazine inhibits androgen production, has a weak estrogenic effect, disrupts luteinizing hormone and prolactin levels, and increases estrogen production. It also damages the adrenal glands and reduces steroid hormone metabolism. That's just the A's from a short list of 105 endocrine disrupting pesticides. This list goes on and on and on. A few of these pesticides are now banned in the U.S., but most are still actively being applied to farm soils. Most will remain persistent in our soils, waterways, and atmosphere for years, if not decades to come. Gen Z and Gen Alpha's gender confusion is real. Their body chemistries are completely haywire. They have been exposed to untold amounts and combinations of these sides and transgenes since they were conceived. FDA approval of these sides was carried out on the individual level. There are no generational studies with test subjects receiving daily subclinical doses of these side cocktails and transgenes over the past 100 years. We are the test subjects. We are witnessing the effects in real time before our very eyes. Gen Z and Gen Alpha's nervous systems have been respectively stimulated to the point of near exhaustion by chemicals that were designed to do exactly that. Their endocrine and reproductive organs have been receiving false gender messages since before they were born. It's no wonder that Gen Z and Gen Alpha are starting to believe what the sides are telling them. The worst for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, though, may be yet to come. Around the time GM crops first appeared on the market in 1999, a study emerged that showed rats fed genetically modified feed were sterile by the third generation, if not the second. Another study at Baylor College of Medicine found that in our animal facility neither breed nor exhibit reproductive behavior when housed on genetically modified corncob bedding. Tests on the material revealed compounds that disrupted endocrine function in male and female rats. Nearly 25 years down the road, we can say definitively that more than 3 generations of other mammals who were raised on genetically modified feed have survived and reproduced. But we must bear in mind that, like insects, most animal species have shorter generation times and more offspring than humans. This increases their survival ability as a species because surviving offspring with even slightly superior detoxification genetics will intensify those genetics when they reproduce with other survivors. Since we've yet to reach our third generation that has been inundated with transgenes and side cocktails starting in the womb, we don't know what the cumulative effects will be for the human race. The first generation to consume genetically modified foods from utero was Generation Z. If Weston A. Price's theory is correct, Generation's grandchildren would be that third generation. If males have an innately superior ability to detoxify their bodies to females, does this mean that they are unaffected by less nutrient-dense foods, transgenes, and side cocktails? The short answer is no. Between 1973 and 2018, men's sperm counts dropped by 1% a year. Between these years, the average man's sperm count dropped by 52% globally. Worse yet, declining sperm counts are accelerating. That 1% a year average decline increased to 2.64% in 2020. Those aren't sperm count declines from men struggling with infertility. They represent the normal average man. The numbers are troubling not simply from a reproductive standpoint, but because men with lower sperm counts generally have a shorter life expectancy. Testosterone rates among men are also declining in general. Testosterone level decline is generally associated with male aging. These results are consistent across male age groups. When declining sperm counts and declining testosterone levels are paired together, we may be looking at a generation of men who will age more rapidly and live shorter lives than they were once genetically capable of having. Roundup seems to affect men differently than women, not only during and after puberty, but also in utero. Roundup exposure during rat pregnancy produced merely a delay in reproductive development in female offspring. But in male offspring, the effects carried into adulthood. Male offspring who were exposed to Roundup in the womb had lower testosterone levels in general than unexposed male offspring. They also produced fewer daily sperm at puberty, and the sperm they did produce was often abnormal. In another study, when mature rat testes were exposed to very low level glyphosate concentrations in a lab, testosterone dropped by 35%. Perhaps the manliest thing a man can do in 2023 is reject Roundup. Between 2014 and 2017, the percentage of Americans between the ages of 55 and 64 who were diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's or dementia grew by 143%. During the same time frame, early onset Alzheimer's increased by 311% for 45 to 54-year-olds. For Americans between the ages of 30 to 44, early onset Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis grew by 373% in the same 3-year time span. Why is early onset Alzheimer's increasing with such an alarming rate? Unsurprisingly, there's an entire web of connections between glyphosate-based sides and Alzheimer's. These include the hijacking of digestive microbes and direct attacks on the substantia nigra, the dopamine center of the brain. The Mississippi isn't just a highway for topsoil loss, it's the borderlands for some of the highest rates of national depression, Alzheimer's, and Parkinson's disease in America. In 2021, Mississippi and Alabama ranked first and second in the nation for Alzheimer's death rate. Arkansas and Louisiana ranked 5th and 6th respectively. Sandwiched between them are Washington and Georgia, also states known for their agriculture. Multiple studies are now showing that there is a relationship between the air we breathe and neurodegenerative disease. Specifically, there is a relationship between breathing in fine particulate matter and inorganic nitrogen fertilizer in the atmosphere and developing Alzheimer's, dementia, and or Parkinson's. Could some of this fine particulate matter also be sides or an amalgam of sides? Quite possibly. When the cascade of generational effects is viewed together, we have to question whether our aim is really to exterminate insects and weeds or our entire civilization. If we continue on our present course, we won't have to worry about whether or not we have the ability to feed a planet of 8 billion people anymore. We won't have 8 billion people to feed. If current trends continue, a substantial percentage of our population won't have children and will be sidelined from life at a young age with early onset Alzheimer's. If a plan had been hatched to conquer America without firing a shot and without ever being held accountable while making a fortune, it could not be working any better. That's the end of chapter 8. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and this channel if you'd like to stay updated when the next chapter is released. You can also go over to my Patreon page, and there I will be sharing more in-depth research and just different notes and thoughts I had as I was doing the research for each chapter. Thank you so much. Bye.